Tonight, after days of sharp exchanges between the big two parties, are we facing another 12 months of the same as we count down to next May's elections? Does anyone benefit from it, or does it simply distract from the poor state of public services? We'll hear from a unionist and a Republican commentator, and from the SDLP leader. Plus, 5 years on from one of the most dramatic periods in local politics, we reflect on the downfall of Arlene Foster.
Somebody who won't name came over to me and said there's going to be fireworks here tonight.
He had the opposite of the political Midas touch. Everything he touched turned to ashes.
And could next week's elections in Scotland and Wales herald major change for the Union? Could there be 3 nationalist First Ministers for the first time, and would it make any difference? Hello. This time 2 weeks ago, executive leaders stood shoulder to shoulder for their first joint press conference in 6 months, a united front aimed at demonstrating how ministers are delivering for the people. But this week has been characterised by some very public sniping between the big two parties. It started over statues and continued after last weekend's Dunmurry bomb attack.
We condemn unequivocally the reckless attacks on Dunmurry Police Station on Saturday. Terrorism is always wrong. It is always without justification. Should that have been 10, 20, 40, 50 years ago or on Saturday night?
When will you end the stay away but take the pay abstentionist policy?
Good party lines, DUP attack lines, well noted in advance of the election.
Will the First Minister always take the opportunity to condemn all other bombings in Dunmurry during the IRA terrorist campaign, including those perpetrated by Bobby Sands? Mr.
Look, I think it's unfortunate that your party decides to try to make some noise out of something that was such a harrowing event for the people of Dunmurry on Saturday night.
The people behind this absolutely horrendous attack on Saturday evening have nothing to offer our society.
The decision to put forward Orla Flynn, MLA, daughter of Patrick Flynn, convicted of an IRA bomb in Dunmurry, to condemn this attack was a calculated insult to victims and a grotesque reminder that Sinn Féin words condemn terrorism, but their politics still romanticise it.
Well, let's pick up on that now with my panel. David Graham is a commentator and former DUP Special Advisor. Chris Donnelly is an Irish News columnist and former Sinn Féin election candidate. And Claire Hanna is the SDLP leader and MP for South Belfast and Mid Down. Welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining me tonight. Let's start with the policing debate. The DUP says Sinn Féin isn't doing enough to support the PSNI. Sinn Féin disputes that. Chris Donnelly, do you see any merit in the DUP charge that Republicans could do more to demonstrate their support for policing?
I thought it was very disappointing the way this week panned out. I think there was a very serious incident, a despicable incident, the bombing attack in Dunmurry, which came as a surprise to many people. And I thought at that moment, what was important was that there was a unified political and civic voice. And we had that for a fleeting moment. And then I think the DUP in particular, other elements of political unionism as well, decided to try to turn this almost into one again of our legacy and narratives on the past.
How did that happen? 1 minute they're standing shoulder to shoulder. The next minute, seemingly, they're taking lumps out of each other.
Well, I don't think they were taking lumps out of each other. It was unionism decided in terms of the political leaders of unionism to say, we're going to turn this into a narrative and a legacy battle. So we had some of the clips that you played there. I thought one in particular was quite appalling, where Carla Lockhart got up in the House of Commons. First of all, she mispronounced the Orla Flynn's name, and then she castigated the Sinn Féin MLA for unequivocally condemning this bombing. She actually said it was a calculated insult to victims' families because Orla Flynn condemned it because of her father's conviction. Now, anyone in this society immediately at that moment would say, this is a senior DUP politician saying that someone cannot condemn something that happened recently because of a relative of theirs conviction. I mean, I'm sure plenty of journalists immediately thought exactly what so many of the rest of us thought. Where does that leave Emma Little Pengelly? Where does that leave her? I mean, personally, I think Everyone should be judged on their own merits. There should be no one who says because someone's relative did something in the past that they should not condemn an incident today. So I think that set the tone, and things have just got worse since then, and we've lost sight of what this should have been about. It should have been about taking a stand, the political leaders across all of the parties saying, we don't want to go back here, because I think that's what everybody out there who supports these parties wanted to hear. It was that moment saying, that's an image from our past, and we don't want to see that again.
OK, and Emma Littlepenkelly's been asked about this before, and she's been very clear that she shouldn't be judged by the actions of her father. And just to be clear, Noel Little, her father, was caught by the French authorities trying to sell British military secrets to South Africa in exchange for weapons. He was never convicted of any offence in the UK and denies smuggling arms for Ulster resistance. So just to put that on the record, let me bring David Graham in. The Sinn Féin argument is essentially, this is manufactured criticism on the part of the DUP. Republicans say unionists are selective in what they see and hear in terms of Republican support for policing. Is that a reasonable position to hold?
Well, I think the tone, and Chris talks about the tone was set when a delivery driver was hijacked and his car was taken, bomb was planted, and it was set outside a PS9 station last Saturday night. So what falls out after that is because someone saw it in their mind that they would make political progress through an act of terror. Yeah,
but I mean, just to be clear, had nothing whatsoever to do with Sinn Féin, and senior Sinn Féin figures were very quick out of the traps to condemn it.
Absolutely, and at the same time too, Martin McGuinness called dissident Republicans traitors traitors against Ireland. So there's nothing new in that. There's nothing new in a united front and then going and kicking lumps out of each other.
So why is the DUP adopting the line that it is adopting? Why did Carla Lockhart get up in the House of Commons and say what she said?
So I think there's probably two areas. I think the obvious answer is everyone's now in election mode. We're 53 weeks away from the election. But the wider point here, Marcus, and we'll take it back a step. Let's look at an illegal erection of a statue, a memorialising of Bobby Sands, who, without giving a history lesson, was someone who took part in a bomb in the 70s in Dunmurry, who's memorialised by Sinn Féin, who people, including today in Talkback, Chris said that he had every right to remember Bobby Sands and commemorate Bobby Sands. But then the exact same thing happens in Dunmurry in 2026, and that then, in the eyes of Sinn Féin, is wrong. And this is not about the DUP. I think this is about unionism and the perception that you can't have, you know, a good terrorist who fought against imperialism and injustice, and then you now have a bad terrorist because it's politically inconvenient in 2026. So it's around the wider narrative and around the wider perception. And I think the bigger problem that we actually have here is the pressure that the police are under. The police were given £1 billion when they were devolved the powers in about 2009. They still are given £1 billion years later. And I think then there is an issue around the actual perception and the confidence in our political classes, where we're putting people in the front line, and without plugging Stephen Nolan's latest documentary, which is excellent, it highlights that normal people are being put in the front line. Normal people and police officers are checking under their cars before they run their kids to school. And I think then if there's a perception that not all terrorism is wrong, then we've got a little bit of an inconsistent message.
OK, I'm not going to ask you, Claire Hanna, to pick sides here between Sinn Féin and the DUP in terms of the debate that we've seen over the past week in the wake of what happened in Dunmurry on Saturday night. But is there virtue in both arguments? I mean, it is not a black and white situation, and as we often say in this programme, it rarely, if ever, is.
No, it's rarely a black and white situation, and there are tensions between people's positions. I do think the DUP in particular just can't help punching bruises whenever they see them. I think ultimately it does benefit both parties. It is a distraction. I suppose the things that they're doing or failing to do in government probably aren't exciting and motivating their base, and I suppose dominating the airwaves. And whenever each time one of these, whether it's, you know, tricolours in a dog show or whatever it is, each time a debate that I suppose plugs into division comes up, it does take the oxygen, it does take the airtime, and people do find themselves, I suppose, taking one side or the other. And I think it does benefit some to keep people locked in a conflict mindset, to keep people locked in the past. And I suppose
for electoral purposes, do you mean?
I guess for electoral purposes, and I suppose it'll walk towards. And I think the DUP are activating it more, but I think ultimately it is a distraction from some of the things that we're failing to do.
Okay.
And I think we're stepping towards the ultimate one, which is the First Minister's race, which is why both of those parties will so fiercely resist changes.
Okay, but look, you're also
mechanism.
fighting for votes with Sinn Féin, that intra-party battle within nationalism. Is it reasonable for the DUP to say there is a degree of hypocrisy here on the part of Republicans to criticise an attack that took place last week, but not to criticise attacks that took place in the same place pre-1994? Because that's the DUP's position.
You've asked me two questions. You know, the SDLP's values. If I was just trying to get, scramble up votes within people who come from the same cultural background as me, that would be one thing. But we're genuinely not, Mark. We're trying to build something new and different, and that means engaging with people from whatever background, because that's the only way we're going to get to a genuine New Ireland, and that's what the SDLP is genuinely committed to doing, and we will be true to our values. And it's not about, saying, we were right in the past, although I think we were. For us, it's not about winning the past, it's about winning the future and trying to pull the narrative and pull the conversation to getting out of this dysfunctional, divided politics and into a new Ireland with a better Northern Ireland as we get there.
OK, look, thank you all for now. Stay with me, because I want to broaden the conversation out beyond what we've been discussing so far, because if the Executive's to succeed, it has to demonstrate that it can deliver for people. Backbenchers have been trading blows across the floor of the Assembly, but ministers have been at it too.
The First Minister, Michelle O'Neill.
See, the DUP want to turn the clock back. They're attempting to block and delay progress on issues that would make a real difference to people's lives. They want to drag society backwards.
And it is notable that Sinn Féin talked about blockages and blocking. If they want to start with reform, they can start with their own party. They can start with removing the blockade on my legislation, some of which has sat for months within the Executive.
Well, that's the views of Michelle O'Neill and Paul Given. Let's hear more from tonight's panel. Chris Donnelly, look, it is hard, I think, for members of the public to work out what's going on, because, as I said earlier, one minute they see the First and Deputy First Ministers delivering joint news conferences they did for the first time a couple of weeks ago in, I think, about 6 months, and a day or two later, senior figures in the two parties are clashing over who's holding up key decisions in the Executive. And that's where this all lands, of course, in terms of delivery for people at a time when resources are tighter, apparently, than ever before.
Well, they are tighter than ever before, and that's why there's a unified message. That the one thing that the Executive is unified, all parties will say that they want more money from Britain. They'll all say that. They'll all say that at the moment. In fact, that gets some criticism from some of the media. I think the Newsletter in particular takes a line saying that the unionism shouldn't be parroting Sinn Féin's position on that. But that's the truth. That's what's happening at the moment. And therefore, because they're recognising that there's a difficulty with the financial situation, we are having the difficulties that Paul Given was alluding to there in his remarks, that there's a legislative block at Stormont. There are difficulties with regard to difficult decisions that are having to be taken. We have the problems with housing that's developing. We have a permanent state of crisis that is our health system. Loughney is a disaster zone. We can't get the A5 built. I don't think there's anybody out there who really thinks that the Communities Minister has any interest in getting Casement Park built. So there is a lot of frustration, not just in our body politic, but I think in the wider electorate. And I think that manifests itself in moments like this. You had that fleeting moment where the two parties' leaders came together to condemn this. I think they knew that that was the right thing to do. And then you had things frazzling after that. And I think that's unfortunate. I take the point that Claire Hanna is making, that ultimately, and I do believe that the greater antagonism, the initiating one, tends to be unionism, and the frustration that's building up within the Nationalist Republican base that I've been writing about recently is because people see that Sinn Féin haven't been striking back. And Sinn Féin, I think, are having to respond to that now, because they know that the grassroots are watching this and thinking, you're not delivering. And there are reasons to understand. There are reasons. A lot of that's complicated. But you're also allowing unionism in the form of the DUP.
So is that why we saw the pushback? I mean, you were quite critical of Sinn Féin in a couple of newspaper articles over the weekend at the time of the Sinn Féin Ardèche, and I put some of your comments to Mary Lou McDonald, the Sinn Féin president on Sunday Politics, and she was pretty disparaging, I think it's fair to say, in her in the way that she responded to that. So do you think that what we've seen from Sinn Féin in the past few days in terms of pushing back against Sinn Féin is dealing with some of the criticism that was coming from people like you?
Well, I don't know if it's dealing with the criticism coming from people like me or they're sensing it themselves. I tend to think they had an hard issue.
Well, maybe you helped them to sense it.
Well, look, they had their hard issue at the weekend. The other thing I would say is Mary Lou McDonald's leading a party with greater ambitions than any other party in this island. They're a credible political and electoral force, north and south at the one time. They're the one party trying to be in government north and south at the one time. Yeah. That is a massive project to be on top of. So I think that, you know, when they come together and they're looking at different things, I've no doubt that they're picking up the frustrations within their base. And I think we're seeing that in some of the responses of their political leaders over the last few days.
OK. Is there a danger as we enter election mode here, David Graham, that unionists push back too hard against Sinn Féin? They poke the bear, and actually that could work to the DUP's disfavour in 53 weeks' time.
Well, look, I think both panellists have mentioned about unionists are always the one that are coming out and trying to bruise and poke people in the eye. I think that's disingenuous and totally unfair. I think if we're going to sit and point score for the next half hour, we're not going to get anywhere. I mean, I think in reality, and I've made the point numerous times, the DUP's biggest problem is Jim Allister. Jim Allister is consistently essentially the unionism's head of policy, if we're quite honest, because John Burrows is coming in and at times doesn't quite know what the Ulster Unionist identity is. And really,
well, he might say that makes him an asset, of course,
well, look,
to the unionist cause.
Well, yeah, but he again is flip-flopping where I think he's probably spending a lot of time with Jim Allister over one shoulder, but he also knows that he needs to garner votes from the middle ground. You know, and I think the reality is, and to pick up a point that Claire said, if the DUP's policy is going to be over the next 12 months, let's try to get in the front foot and sort of engage in some sort of culture war. Ultimately, the TV will probably actually benefit in the long run for that. I think that if we're going to get into this two-horse race to become the First Minister, again, we're on a hiding to nothing because...
But that's what always happens.
Well, look, unionism has an opportunity to increase its, not only its vote share, but increase the number of seats that it represents within the Assembly. That is not the DUP, not the Ulster Unionists or the TEV. There has to be a collective view, and if the policy is let's go on the front foot and try to basically outshout each other, well then that's not going to work.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, if there is some kind of project here to bring about some kind of unionist unity, I know you're not a member of the DUP, but someone with your background as a DUP special advisor saying that unionism's biggest challenge at the moment is Jim Allister. The DUP's biggest challenge is Jim Allister. Does not help unionist unity, does it?
No, but I think that Jim Allister is the biggest challenge because he is the most articulate unionist who, whether people like him or loathe him, he has been very clear in his Ron-Seal approach of doing exactly what he says in the tin. I think that the DUP have struggled at times where they know they have to embrace the middle ground. They know they have to pick up what Alex Keane would have called the garden centre unionist. They know, as Peter Robinson said 20 years ago, they have to attempt to get Catholics to vote for them. They have to attempt small unions to vote for them. Now, with the increase in immigration, they get newcomers to vote for them, people to embrace the union. But I think if we continually go back to engaging in our trenches to try to, I suppose, out TEV the TEV, well then the only beneficiary is going to be the TEV in the longer term. So ultimately that's a wider conversation for all of unionism.
Right, let's come back to delivery, Claire Hanna. There's not been much progress resolving that big financial challenge that we talked about a moment or two ago. You may or may not have heard this morning on the Nolan Show, Naomi Long set out the challenges facing her department. She says, trying to run the Justice Department with 8%, she's trying to run her department with 8% of the block grant, while Health and Education have 71% between them. And she says the time has come for money to be given back to Justice from other executive departments. Now, if we're going to make Stormont work, you're a party of opposition. Is that what needs to happen? There needs to be a redistribution of funds.
Well, I'm going to make an overall point, and it is the elephant in the room about assembly reform. And the one positive is that now the DUP are even talking about the St Andrews reform, which is one of the 3 proposals the SDLP has made. Look, every government...
Sinn Féin promised reform at the Ardèche at the weekend.
And I'm glad we forced this on.
And we'll see the details in due course.
Look, every government has constraints. There's no doubt about that, as does this one. And the SDLP will always fight for more. But there is a deliberate and affected powerlessness, you know, and not taking responsibility, blaming each other, blaming London, and Alliance do that as well. The reason that health and education take up so much of the budget is because of a failure to reform and reform public services, and that flows, for example, from a failure to agree a multi-year budget. And it's worth saying, a few months ago, the Finance Minister was presenting his budget. Fair play to him. He put something on the table saying it was a great budget, and now that they can't get it through, they're saying, well, we can't do a budget.
Well, his position now shifted to saying that the UK government needs to give the Northern Ireland Executive more money.
It was the right budget, and I think particularly, as I say, for those of us who are interested in New Ireland, who are proposing to people to embark on an enormously constitutionally ambitious project, we need to be able to show that we can do things.
Right, let's go back to my question that was raised by Naomi Long. Do you think voters, broadly speaking, would be supportive of a scenario whereby money was taken from departments like health and education and given to justice? Do you think that would be broadly welcomed here?
Voters know that public services are in diffs. Voters know that we've been talking about reforming public services, certainly the 15 years that I've been in politics, and we haven't actually done that.
But please answer my question, because they won't want to see schools and hospitals denuded of resources.
But the reason we're denuding is because we're double running, because we're not actually doing the reforms, and we're not giving them the certainty of a multi-year budget. So the things that they need to do to maybe
that's transformation. Services, and money's been made available for transformation, and 4% has been spent so far.
But that's my point. You're basically saying, should we always just slice off bits of this service or that, or should we address the problems holistically in the long term?
Well, that doesn't seem to be possible
with the multi-year budget. But my point is, Mark,
nobody seems able to do that.
3 months ago, the Finance Minister presented a multi-year budget and said we're now going to agree it. They couldn't get it agreed, and now the story has changed to we don't have enough money, and we do have going on 30 billion of a budget. This confected partisan, I need to come back. If you're proposing to people that you're going to build a new Ireland, but yet you can't clean up the lock in the middle of it, you can't build the interconnector, you can't build the A5, it's not going to fill people with much hope about what we can collectively achieve.
Right, Chris, Brian Feeney wrote an article in the Irish News recently in which he essentially argued Stormont's time is up. Do you think, broadly speaking, there are big numbers within nationalism who would say he's got a point?
I think it's probably not just within nationals. A lot of people have a sense of disillusionment. I think it boils down to this. There's a lack of cohesion. There's complete distrust around the executive table. And when that happens, people will not take the difficult decisions because they think that they're going to be targeted. And the other thing, I think, which is always sitting there in our conversations, nobody believes the buck stops at Stormont. They always believe it's going to get bailed out.
OK. Could you just, in a couple of words, do you agree that Brian Feeney might have a point, or do you think he's wide of the mark?
I think the bottom line is somebody has to govern the place. We all spent years rightly critiquing the DUP for their pull down. So now I think it's ludicrous to propose exactly the same thing. It's pie in the sky. Do we think that a London minister is going to do any better?
I don't think Brian Feeney's making the case for direct rule.
Well, I'm sorry. Unfortunately, we don't live in a land where immediately London and Dublin would go to a border poll. That's duping people. And no, I think it's irresponsible and it's pathetic, frankly.
OK, all right. We got to leave it there for now. Thanks very much again. I want to pause for a moment and move from present-day inter-party disagreements to the internal convulsion that threatened to sink one of those parties 5 years ago this week. Arlene Foster's resignation as DUP leader set in train a dramatic 8 weeks for what was then Northern Ireland's largest political party. For some, the political scars from the period still haven't healed. Here's a quick reminder of what happened.
In this room, we all know that there is not an old DUP and a new DUP. There is only one Democratic Unionist Party.
Fine as the first woman party leader for the DUP, that some of your male colleagues are still finding that hard to get used to?
Well, I suppose that's a question for them rather than for me.
you feed a crocodile, they're going to keep coming back and looking for more.
A short time ago, I called my party chairman to inform him that I intend to step down as leader of the Democratic Unionist Party.
Probably one of the worst leaders ever.
Arlene, who's going to replace Arlene? I'm not sure there's anybody capable of it.
A big night for the DUP as its new leader prepares to take the reins, and big promises for Edwin Poots to make good on. So can he succeed in uniting the party and finding solutions to the challenging political issues that lie ahead?
A very dramatic night indeed, Mark. Certainly a much more dramatic night than Edwin Poots or any of his supporters wanted. But people like Jeffrey Donaldson, Nigel Dodds, Diane Dodds, Gavin Robinson didn't wait to hear that speech. They left the building.
Arlene Foster fought off the IRA, and now her own party has stabbed her in the back.
Anyone in this party can talk about difficulty. It's me. I saw what happened to my dad. It killed my father.
This is very bad for Edwin Poots tonight. He removed Arlene Foster by a coup, and there was talk that there was going to be a coup to depose him before he actually even became leader.
No confidence, Jeffrey.
I have to say, Jeffrey and I have worked in Lagan Valley for many, many years, decades, and we've never had a crossword in the constituency. And Jeffrey has a key role, as does Gregory, in going forward in this party.
Edwin, can you tell us what happened in there? Did you face a motion of no confidence? Are you still leader of the party? Are you going to be leader of the party tomorrow? Can you tell us what happened? Have you no comment?
Another month, another DUP leader. Only this time Sir Jeffrey Donaldson has the backing to last much longer than the 21 days of his predecessor.
That's life. That's what all the people say. You're riding high in April, shut down in May. Is that enough for you, Gareth?
Gareth Gordon in the middle of it once again, and this week on Redlines we brought him together with Suzanne Breen and Tim Cairns to discuss their memories of a dramatic 6 weeks in politics here, and here's a flavour of that conversation.
Manchester United had lost the Europa League final the previous night, and I was still struggling with that when I turned up at the Crown Plaza. You won't understand that, but anyway, take it from me. And then I was thinking, it's going to be a rubber stamping anyway, just go through the motions, walk in, vote, come out, move on. And then somebody who won't name came over to me and said, there's going to be fireworks here tonight. The party officers wanted a secret vote, which rang alarm bells in the Poots camp. The Poots camp pushed back. Eventually it was ratified, his leadership, by a show of hands. 72 to 28, I remember here. And then big beasts, Jeffrey Donaldson, Gregory Campbell, Gavin Robinson, others, Nigel Dodds particularly, came walking out, didn't wait for Edwin Poots' victory speech, and that just doesn't happen in the DUP.
Arlene Foster did not realise the levels of discontent. There were MLAs that I was speaking to at that time who were loyalists to Arlene Foster, but were loyalists no more. There were people who were thinking we could lose our seat here unless we make a change of leader. And that's why the move was made. It was remarkable how quickly people who had been previously loyal to Arlene started to turn against her. And it just seemed that Arlene didn't see that those people were now against her. And she didn't put time in, it seemed to me, to try and woo those people back. She thought she was the leader and she could ride it out. Ultimately, she couldn't. Actually, it's quite similar to what we see, I think, with Keir Starmer right now. We see someone who is legally trained, although obviously Keir Starmer got to the top of the profession and Arlene didn't before she went into politics. But we see two people who believe they're over detail, but maybe aren't. We see two people who are very hands-off when you would expect them to be hands-on. We see two people who you would expect to, be curious about the detail. Arlene Foster, of course, famously said she wasn't over every jot and tittle of even legislation that she was bringing through the Assembly.
Edwin Poots managed to get his ducks in a row in terms of wresting power away from Arlene Foster into his own hands, but then he didn't actually have the skills that were required to use the power that he had got for himself. And it just started falling apart straight away.
Look, he had the opposite of the political Midas touch. Everything he touched turned to ashes. It was always going to be hard because of the narrowness of that vote. 1917, one vote different could have changed the outcome. I remember watching, I think it was Paul Given, Ian Paisley and Johnny Buckley strolling down the street to party headquarters after Edwin had won. And I think some of them were punching the air. There was a bit of a swagger in their step. It was like the DUP does, Reservoir Dogs. But really, there wasn't a great plan about what to do next.
You'll find that full conversation on this week's Red Lions, which is available now on BBC Sounds or wherever you get your podcasts. Now, this time next week, the polls will have closed in local elections in England and national elections in Scotland and Wales. The outcome could have a significant bearing on Sir Keir Starmer's time in Downing Street, but it could also throw up, for the first time, the prospect of 3 nationalist First Ministers. Let's speak to the author and political writer, Ian McWhirter. Ian, good to talk to you. Welcome to the programme. You wrote the book about this, The Disunited Kingdom. How disunited might the UK be next Friday?
Well, I think we're kind of living in borrowed time. I don't think people fully understand what's happening. And for the first time, the Scottish National Party leader, John Swinney, has actually been talking about working in some kind of cooperation with Sinn Féin. Now, in the past, the SNP has been incredibly leery of importing Northern Ireland politics into Scotland. That seems to have evaporated. And of course, they're now seeing the prospect of Plaid Cymru dominating the Senate in Wales. And so they have this idea that there's now a kind of Celtic arc. I know that might sound bizarre to include Northern Ireland, a Protestant enclave, in a kind of Celtic arc, but that's the way they're seeing it, a kind of Celtic uprising. And I mean, it may well be that this will have an impact. I don't think it's going to have an impact in the immediate future. And the SNP is not hugely popular in Scotland. And while, you know, a slim majority of Scots still say they favour independence for Scotland, there's absolutely no enthusiasm for an early border poll, if you like, in Scotland. But they're very keen in trying to import that debate from Northern Ireland into Scotland.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It's fascinating. John Swinney looks like he's going to be returned as Scotland's next First Minister, and he has said he'll work with the 2 other First Ministers in Wales and Northern Ireland. But I just wonder how you see that working in practical terms, because, I mean, apart from anything else, the First Minister here doesn't have the autonomy that the Scottish and Welsh First Ministers have. It's a joint office with Emma Little-Pengelly, and she's a committed unionist.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's no constitutional expression of this kind of, you know, Celtic uprising, as they unhistorically call it. But I think there is it just cannot be not be significant that you have these nations and regions of the UK having nationalist leaders. And if they have any imagination whatsoever, they will start to make kinds of organisations or make an expression of that constitutional emergence. And, you know, it is significant if these... there will be some political consequence for it, as I say, if they have any imagination at all. And what they're trying to do, obviously, is to try and create something like the Nordic Union in Scandinavia, whereby these countries sort of initially have cross-cultural cooperation and then start to see some kind of political integration.
I want to ask you about Reform, Ian, as well. It looks like that party may well perform strongly in England, could perform strongly in Wales and again in Scotland. Do you think it's a party that will boost the union or potentially tear it apart?
Well, this is a big contradiction at the same time as the SNP is talking about independence. You have... you know, the quintessentially English nationalist party led by Nigel Farage, who's never been a great enthusiast for Scotland in the past, possibly, according to the opinion polls, becoming second in these elections, becoming the official opposition in Holyrood from nowhere. I mean, immigration has never been an issue in the past in Scotland. Suddenly, it's now registering as number 3. And of course, Reform have their brand of politics is loathed by the left, and everyone assumed that Scots, because they're supposed to be inherently progressive-minded, that they would never entertain voting for a party like Reform. But there they are. I mean, they're ahead of Labour. And I think this is going to have a number of consequences, for perhaps more dramatic consequences for UK politics, because if Labour is beaten by Reform in Scotland, if Anna Sarwar is defeated effectively, then that is going to be another nail in the coffin of Keir Starmer, because Labour used to dominate Scotland.
Okay.
So only a year and a half ago, they assumed they were going to be measuring the curtains in Bute House, because they thought they were going to replace the SNP, who are a tired government after being in power for nearly 20 years.
Okay.
So I think it's going to be quite serious for Keir Starmer.
Intriguing week ahead for sure. Ian, interesting to hear your thoughts. Thanks very much indeed for joining us on the programme. Just time for a quick word with my 3 studio guests. Chris, Sinn Féin's playing up the possibility of 3 nationalist First Ministers. Michelle O'Neill mentioned it at the weekend. The reality is they aren't there, of course, because of majority support to end the union, are they?
No, there are different reasons. I mean, obviously the SNP, Plaid Cymru, they do have that as their ultimate goal. But I think the significance of it lays somewhere else, actually. I think really, if this does turn to pass, it'll be almost the next chapter in the post-Brexit Britain. And I think it'll further fuel questioning of old certainties that have been turned on their head. And I think in that environment, in our local context, it's more about how those who would post-Brexit have been questioning, their identity, about their future, how this maybe continues that process. OK,
David, are you worried that the symbolism of 3 nationalist First Ministers potentially could rock the union on its heels?
Not really. I mean, in reality, it would be 2.5 First Ministers, because Michelle O'Neill can't sign off anything without having her unionist colleague provide the same signature. So it's more actually for me to flip the debate on its head. I think Reform are probably a greater threat to the union than any nationalist First Minister in any other country. For me, whether you like it or not, from unionist point of view, you need a strong Labour in Scotland, because it stems the tide of the SNP.
Okay.
I would seriously question Nigel Farage's unionist credentials, regardless of how many times he sends party members over here.
OK. Claire, just want to ask you very quickly about where all of this leaves Keir Starmer, because his leadership is clearly under pressure, and if the vote doesn't go the way he would like it to go next Thursday across the water, he could be in big diffs. Is that what people are saying in the Palace of Westminster?
I think so. I mean, I'm not professing to be any interpreter, but I think the name of the game is an orderly transition. But next week is a significant election, because it proves to those who doubt it, the UK is changing. So we can either decide to be passengers in wherever Reform or Labour or whoever want to take us, or we can build something new and better together. This is a structural shift. It isn't a flash in the pan. Next occupant of number 10 after Keir Starmer could be a roll of the dice. So those parties who want to criticise this government, the last government, the next one, need to really think about the constitutional future. And also we should learn the lessons of Scotland and Wales. Yes, they complain about London. Yes, they have frustrations, but they get on with it. And the SNP got where they were through 10 years of demonstrating power in their hands. Government's difficult, it's grinding, but we have to do it. We have to be honest with people that it has to be done. OK,
we're out of time, folks. Thanks very much indeed for joining me on the programme tonight. I'll be back with Sunday Politics at the weekend. That's live on BBC One and iPlayer at 10 o'clock as usual. You can catch it at 1 o'clock on Radio Ulster and on BBC Sounds because of coverage of the Belfast Marathon. For now, though, from everyone on the team, thanks for watching. Good night.